Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. You don't have to sit so far away. I don't think anybody else is going to come and fill in the rest of the seats. So I'm Rob Ehrman. We have a great panel. One of our other panelists, Kate Hawk, had a family emergency, so she was not able to attend. So we're going to kind of go through, each of us has a couple of slides talking about some sort of do's and don'ts and thoughts about how to start a research career and sustain and have a successful career. So with that, I will pass it over. Oh, these are our disclosures that we all have. Oops. Doesn't this work? Oh, because I'm pushing the wrong button. Okay, Dr. Lal.
Thanks.
Oh, here, the green button advances.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Michelle Lal. I'm a professor and vice chair of DEI at Emory in Atlanta. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about medical education research, and I guess the spin-off on that too is on research that's a little bit more challenging to fund. So I have spent the majority of my career looking at medical education, looking at disparities and bias in emergency medicine, and it's really hard to get funding for this type of work. So we're going to talk a little bit about, particularly in education research, I think the most important thing you can do for yourself is find your passion, right? It's much easier to spend your valuable time on things that you love and things you love to do than it is to try to put yourself as maybe a round peg into a square hole, right? So really thinking about what you love, what you like to do, and how you can turn it into scholarship. And I think that's been a big evolution over the last 10 years, particularly is how do I make the work that I'm doing more meaningful? How do I demonstrate its impact, right? And I think for medical educators, we've been really fortunate to have AEM, academic and training, or education and training come online because we have a home for our work. Because for a long time, it was you could maybe put it in MedEd portal. There might be a couple other places you could put it, but unless it was really, really robust, it probably wasn't going into academic medicine. So, now in emergency medicine, since we have a journal, it's helpful to be able to get your work publicized. So the other thing is think about your intersectionality with others who are already doing work. So I do a lot of work in gender bias and gender disparities, and really I can collaborate with almost anybody in my department doing any type of research to look at it from a potential gender angle. So think about what you love to do and how it may come into play. So maybe you're a medical education researcher, but you're really interested in low fidelity SIM, right? Connect with the SIM folks, find out how you can do a study, find out how you can collaborate with others to make it multi-institutional. So all those things that can help lead us in the right way. So again, use your networks, leverage your networks. I think that's something that, especially when you're early in your career, it's kind of hard to imagine yourself maybe as part of a network or try to reach out to an existing network. So find your mentors and let them help you do that. Think about too the return on investment, right? So a lot of times when you are trying to research topics or ideas that maybe don't come with a lot of external funding opportunities, how do you negotiate with your chair? How do you talk to them about, this is really important work and I'm going to tell you why? Right? So you want to make sure that you're letting the people know above you, the people who pay for you, right, how your work is going to impact their department. How is it going to make it better? Because there are things you can negotiate for, right? You might be able to negotiate for some time. There might be some internal seed funding that's available in your department to help sponsor your project. There might be funding like that at the institutional level, sometimes even within the hospital level, frankly, sometimes in the community, depending on what you're looking at. So I'm based in Atlanta, and we have a lot of community partners that are really interested in anything that could help improve patient outcomes, right? And the first step to many patient outcomes is making sure that we've educated our people to take good care of patients, right? So really think broadly. And then I think kind of the last big thing I want to talk to you about is move beyond the survey. Like really nobody cares if they liked it or not, right? Like let's just be upfront about that. Like, yes, if the trainees liked an intervention that you did, a medical education-based intervention, like that's great. You want them to like it, you want their buy-in, but nobody else cares about your survey. So I say that because it's important, right, to tap into the really, illustrious researchers in your department to say, how can I move beyond a survey? What is tangible? What's concrete? What's objective? What can I look at to make this work have a higher value to the community at large? And then, of course, you want to consider dissemination. Can you reproduce your work? Is it really novel, and what is the actual impact? So that kind of goes back to your networks, right? If you can demonstrate something across 10 programs, probably has a lot more impact than demonstrating it just in your home institution. So we do have a course, right? We have Armed Med Ed, which is available through SAEM, which can really help you learn more about a lot of those points I was just hitting on, right? So how do I get my work funded, and how do I make sure my work has impact? And then, of course, the AACEM offers the MERC program as well. All right.
Great. Good morning, everyone. We'll turn a little bit more to the rest of us are a little more, well, not a little more, much more engaged in clinical research with maybe possibly some basic science components, but much more clinical research rather than medical education research. So I'll kind of delve a little bit more into that area. And I guess, really just two takeaways was, at least from my experience, it was to consider engaging in some kind of formal methodology training. A lot of this depends on your background and what kind of, research, statistics, and methodology training you may already have. Maybe you were a stats, undergrad major, et cetera. But the two is just engage in the EM research committee, which you all are doing by, being here, but continues to be important. And I'll put a quick plug. I chair the research committee this year, and we would love to have you apply. If you're not already on the research committee, apply for next year. Despite all the, there's some work involved with it, but it's also a wonderful way for everyone at SAEM to meet other people to do research in your area and really engage with groups that are doing it. So in terms of my timeline, it's been a bit of a long journey. I first submitted actually an RO3 grant to GEMSTAR as a PGY5 resident, which ended up getting scored but not funded, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I had a geriatric mentor at that time who had never submitted a grant, and so he didn't know what to do with it either. So either way, I kind of migrated shortly after that more toward neuroemergencies research with a mentor that actually had some more formal understanding of grant funding. And a few years into faculty, I submitted an internal K award. We had a non-federally funded physician scientist track for 3 years of funding that initially wasn't awarded, but over time was able to resubmit and get additional mentorship in that. And then I realized early on as I was going down this pathway that I really did not know anything about statistics. I knew absolutely nothing about what a confidence interval was. I knew nothing about how to read a method section of an article or write a method section for a grant. And so it was difficult to decide to do because it is a commitment, but eventually committed to do a 2-year program, and actually Rob did the same program a few years after me in terms of doing a master's in statistics and research methodology at the University of Michigan, which if anyone wants to talk about that or other programs afterwards, I'm always happy to talk about. And so that really was, for me, was an absolutely necessary step to be able to have the wherewithal and the expertise to really submit relatively, okay quality grants. I'm still working on high quality grants, but at least okay quality grants. And so then after finishing the career development and really up to 2022, I submitted a lot of grants and none of them got funded. And then finally was, through the research collaborations we have within SAEM and specifically within the Siren network, which I've been involved with for a long time, was able to collaborate with some really great people at Duke University and the University of Washington and submit a R01 that was funded. So, here's the list in NIH Reporter of all the grants that were submitted that weren't funded. So it is, a lot of it is, it seems like an exercise in futility for a long time, but over time, as you get more and more experience submitting, resubmitting, you actually do get put together some decent stuff. Now, not all of those were de novo grants. Many were resubmissions or whatnot. So, again, this is the program I did in biostats, which was invaluable. For instance, just learning how to think about power and sample size is huge when you're thinking about what you're going to do with your research. Whether it's just a simple project you want to do with a resident versus submitting a large grant, et cetera. So, feel free to reach out. And then I just put this up as an example. This was actually a recent, journal editorial comment, that I got as a review for a paper. And so being able to understand how to even deal with, ICCs and, they were asking me is the analytical approach for this using part R2 package in R and, all these, if I had tried to do that when, my first few years of my career, I would have been completely lost as to how the heck to respond to the reviewer. Now, granted, I had a statistician who was working on this, but my statistician, there's some disconnect between speaking clinical language and speaking stats and then responding to a reviewer in an effective manner. So responding to this on this article for Annals was a lot easier with the kind of training that we're able to do. I'll just highlight, the research community here. These are between in-person meetings and Zoom meetings. I mean, this is a lot of how we get team science done, and writing a grant with others that have the same interest and are, whether that's a similar career stage or later career stage. When we wrote the R01 that was successful, we had a guy that was similar career stage, just finished a K award, a guy named VJ at Duke. But then we also had a more senior mentor that went in a multi-PI project, and she was invaluable in terms of helping us consider things about the specific study section we applied to, et cetera. And then another thing that just to highlight too is I also help co-lead our ARM course over the last few years, and if any of you are interested in plugging in to this research community that we have within SAEM, consider applying to the ARM course this year or having your mentees or colleagues apply to the ARM course. It's a great way to do exactly what we're all talking about and get into that community of applying for grants and getting funding and accelerating research careers. So those applications are open now, due July 31st. And so, again, research community, consider methodology training. That'd be my main two takeaways for today. Thanks.
Hello. I'm not Kate Hawk, but I could never replace her. Unfortunately, yeah, she had to leave for a family thing. The one thing that I just wanted to mention briefly, because she and I were actually talking about this a couple nights ago, is this first point, sort of how not to talk about a research career. A lot of times, right, you hear people say, oh, research is a death march, a career in research is a death march. And, right, it is and it isn't, but it's what's most important, I think, is that it's not. It's a labor of love. We're in it. I think all of us here and everybody who does research recognizes that it's hard, it's a different path, it's an arduous path, but we have chosen this path or these, different pathways along, the kind of trajectory of what research can be because we enjoy doing it. And it's different from a clinical trajectory, which is okay, but it's hard, but it's rewarding. And so that's the thing to always remember, is that I think we kind of talk about, it being a death march sort of with a grain of salt and we're all kind of, miserable together, but it's not miserable. It actually is really enjoyable and can be really rewarding. And so I highly encourage you to pursue a research career.
So my name is Fahim Gergis. I'm from University of Florida, and I'll just take you through a couple of the things that I've learned along the way. And apologies if this is small, but I will point out a few things. This is kind of my career timeline. And just to point out a few things about where this went, I think in the beginning, I was starting from a place where there was not a lot of experience getting people funded, NIH-funded research careers. And so I was sort of all over the place talking to different mentors, people from, University of Florida, but also outside. I actually flew to University of Mississippi and met with Alan Jones in 2013 because he was a sepsis expert and I was trying to build up my career and just get experts and get advice. And so I was very much all over the place, just getting information from wherever I could get it. And then finally in 2014, I actually got an extramural grant funded from Society of Critical Care Medicine. And it's amazing how just getting one small extramural grant, which, not small, it was like $50,000 or something, but, it was a startup. Getting some external investment in your work from whether it's a foundation, a society grant, something like that can really lead to sort of the next grants for you and really just stimulate your career and get things going. And so that was a big sort of, help for me to get that first real grant. And then at that point, I didn't really even know what a K was for the first few years I was trying to do this, and then somebody was like, oh, you should probably write a K grant. And so I got some help from our Dean of Research at University of Florida. He connected me with some folks, and the first time I had submitted a K, I got a really horrible score. Actually, one of my mentors was like, I didn't know you could get a 63 on a K grant submission. And I was like, okay. And I was like, all right. But it's a number, so that's better than no number. So I spent a year and a half figuring that out, fixed it up, submitted it, got it, and then since then it's sort of history. But I will lean a little bit more on the K side of things in terms of career development if you're trying to go down the NIH career track. And so I'll come back to that in a second. But I think the first thing you want to make sure about is that you're in a supportive environment. And, you may be in a place that isn't all that familiar, but you want to make sure, I'm familiar with this type of work or this type of career, but you do want to make sure that they understand how important it is to an academic department and that they're willing to sort of support the cost of having research in the department. It's generally something that brings in money, but there's also losses in a lot of ways. Our salaries are quite high. They're over NIH caps. And so they have to be willing to sort of absorb the differences there and also invest in having people with these types of careers and this type of work in the department. So I think that's always an important discussion at the beginning. One of the things that really helped me was trying to find somebody whose career I wanted to emulate. I wanted to look a lot like some of the people that I'd seen as mentors doing the kind of clinical trials in sepsis or other translational studies. And it was really helpful to have somebody that I was like, okay, that's kind of where I want to be in like 10 years. And so that's just something that stuck out in my mind and was helpful for quite a while. I always think it's important as clinicians to have a clinician scientist mentor, even if they're not in the same specialty as you. My primary mentor on my K was a trauma surgeon, and he was very balanced in the way he knew. He's like, I'm not an emergency medicine doctor, but he understood a lot of what clinician scientists go through, right? And we're a fairly rare species. So but knowing that he had clinical responsibilities, he knew we had the same thing. It was very helpful, and so I encourage you to do that. And then meeting with them regularly, having your mentorship meetings, very organized, keeping track of everything. Make sure you get the most out of that time. My primary mentor had 40-minute attention span. If it went past 40 minutes, he was done. I wasn't going to get anything else out of that meeting. So I had to be like super organized, ask him everything I needed to ask, and get it all out, and then get to the next thing. When you think about mentors, because this is so important when you're going down this path, you really need good mentorship. Some people are really sort of pigeonholed in how they see getting mentorship. They think they want the exact person in the same specialty, in the same field. Everything has to be the same. That's not really true. I think of it as like a Venn diagram, and just zoom out, right? You may, somebody the other day actually asked me if they wanted to do some cardiac arrest work, and they're at an institution, and they're like, well, I don't have anybody here. This is a critical care medicine doctor. He's like, I don't have anybody here that can do cardiac arrest or mentor cardiac arrest work. So I started Googling it, and I found somebody who is a cardiologist who'd had R01s and other grants, and 20 years ago had a whole bunch of stuff on cardiac arrest prognostication, and then some of his work had sort of moved over. So I say that to say, just be creative. You can find experts or mentors who have some expertise, but it doesn't have to be exactly what you in your mind are thinking that it has to be. You don't be so limited in your view of it. Write a lot. And as you saw, I think Joe's slides, and you have to write a lot of papers, you have to submit a lot of grants. publishing with your mentors is huge because it establishes the validity of your team. It also establishes your track record. Pursuing funding, obviously, with your mentors on there, if there's a career development awards, is really huge as well. If you have a KL2 or a K-12 program at your institution, that's a great way to start. You can always talk to the PI of that program, PIs of those programs, and get their advice on sort of what mentors at your institution are available and apply for those and get feedback. So that's a great way to be in a little bit more smaller pool of applicants. And I would also say if you're a clinician scientist applying for a KL2 or a K-12 spot at your institution, you tend to be a little bit more competitive because they really want to fund clinicians. I say this because I help run the KL2 program at University of Florida. So it does help coming from our background. I say don't miss the K boat if it's possible. If you're within the first 10 years and you're trying to get your career started and you still need the career development activities, then a K is great for that. It's not the only route, as you'll hear in a minute. There's many different ways of doing it, but I think that's one of the nicer ways. It's more well laid out. And then pilot funding just shows some external investment in your work. That really helps others get interested as well. And don't give up.
Hello. All right. Hi, I'm Rob Berman. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself before. So I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions that you guys have. So I know Joe mentioned a little bit this idea of formal statistics training, methodology training, and I would say do it. It's probably been the single biggest contributor to the success of my career, whatever successes I have. And kind of on a number of different ways has it been rewarding. One is, what kind of got me interested in it was when I was starting out in research and we had a department statistician, and you're waiting for someone else to do your analysis. You're waiting for someone else to do a power calculation. And it felt just like interminable having to wait all the time, and you try to learn a little bit and do a little bit more. And finally I got fed up, and someone in my department, speaking of having, a mentor said, hey, you should think about doing this program, and it actually was the same program that Joe did. Going through it is, it's challenging, but also you learn a ton. You learn to not only, do your own stats, but it helped me better understand other papers in my field, kind of recognize limitations in methods and statistical approaches, and sort of inform how I would kind of change, what I did with my research. Or, hey, I identified this issue, and now with these methods, I'm going to address it and try to kind of fill this gap or answer the question in a different way. Something else too that kind of goes back to what I was talking about is that Kate was going to present is how to make a research career successful and enjoyable. Something else I do is I do biostatistics on the side, sort of. I'm a stats editor for AACEM and a couple other journals. Through my knowledge and my work, I've also got almost a quarter of my salary funded on other grants doing stats work. So, I like working in the ED, but also I'd rather sit in, a chair at home drinking coffee, coding, and having done a lot of this work and spent a lot of time doing this, I can now do that. And everybody, kind of hates statistics in a way, but I love it and I've embraced it, and it's something that brings me time and satisfaction, and has also helped my own research become a little bit better. So again, it's easy to say, yes, you should do it. My department was super generous and covered a portion of the tuition. But I think there are a number of programs throughout the country. Some of them are in person, but there are also a lot of it sort of executive type programs where you go, at night or, on weekends and stuff like that. It's a commitment, but 100% I would do it again. And I would say, if you can do it, you should do it. So I know Fahima just kind of talked about this. The K Award is a great pathway to success in a research career. But it's not the only one, and it's probably the most well-trodden and the most established is helping people achieve success as an independently funded investigator. And it's great if you can do it. Not everybody can do it. There's some, whether it's, and again, not to say that not to take away from it at all, but like there are sometimes institutional barriers to you doing it. There are personal barriers that just kind of make it not the right fit or at the right time. And there was a time when I said, okay, I'm going to apply for a K grant, and it couldn't make it work for reasons. And so for about 6 months, I thought, well, okay, there goes my research career, right? Because I can't do this K, I'm not going to get it, and therefore I will never get independent research funding, at least from the NIH. And after, mulling it over and stewing, and then talking to some people who said, like, hey, there are some other things you can do. I actually did, and I got an SAEM, the research training grant, and et cetera, and then ultimately had some success with funding. So it's something to think about, but we think a lot about NIH is sort of the end all be all of funding sources, and it is a great funding source, but there are a lot of other opportunities out there, both sort of at the foundation level and also at the federal level. I mean, there's DOD. And other things. So don't feel like you have to have an R01 to be successful. I mean, obviously that's kind of what we all want, and it's maybe it is a way to be successful, but it's not the only way. And again, one of the other things to think about is, everybody wants to have some external validation that your ideas are good and worthy of saying, like, here's a couple $1 million to try to prove this thing. But you can make a successful contribution to science with smaller grants, incremental progress. And in fact, most science and most progress works in very small steps, not like huge leaps. And then this is the kind of a recurring theme, but persistence. One of my mentors, every time I had a grant rejected, and my list of submitted and not discussed and rejected grants is like so long. But what he has always told me is like, your list of failures will always be substantially longer than your list of successes. And remember that the most successful people who have the most funding, who have the most R1s, whatever, probably have the longest list of failed grants. And the sort of flip side to that is always to think about, well, one, I shouldn't say failed grants, right? Because they're not really failures. You learn something, you submit a grant, it doesn't get discussed, you stew over it, or you get a non-fundable score. But you learn, you read the comments, you learn from it, and you make the next one better. I mean, I think I submitted a R35 3 times before it got funded. So, you have to just, the first time I talked to the program officer, and she kind of was like, yeah, I don't know that this is, you can resubmit it, but like, I don't think you can fix this. It's probably never gonna get funded. And I was like, and it was like a once-a-year resubmit cycle. So anyways, you just kind of, it is sort of a death march, but it's like a labor of love death march, because it's like, I essentially spent my entire career working on this single idea, and I started as an ultrasound fellow, and my fellowship director was like, yeah, that's sort of interesting, but like, you're not gonna get anywhere with it. And I submitted grant after grant that were, first not discussed, then poorly scored, and says, yeah, nobody cares, this isn't gonna do anything. And I was kind of almost ready to give up, and I guess I'm glad I didn't. But you kind of have to think about being persistent, but you can also take advice of other people, change directions, start working on something else. You may be a co-I on a grant and you get interested in something else. And so again, it's like always growing, always thinking about what's gonna keep you happy, what's gonna keep you successful in your career, and always kind of moving forward rather than just stagnating. But yeah, the line between persistence and insanity is razor thin. All right, so that's all I have. And then so we can take questions from you guys, or we have questions for ourselves too.
I'll bring the mic to anyone that wants to ask questions. I have a quick question for any of you as I bring the mic over here. How do you all find time for writing? Or what do you do? What strategies do you do for that?
So I think you have to know your most productive time of the day, right? So like, are you a morning person? Are you a late person? And you honestly you have to schedule it, just like you would schedule anything else that you're dedicated to. So I don't know if any of you have read or are familiar with the book Deep Work, right? But it really talks about like essentially isolating yourself from all stimulus, right? Your phone, turning off the email alerts on your computer, and like blocking the time. And I think, as we've heard everybody say, like the writing is critical. And at least for me, the hardest hurdle is just starting. So I put it on my calendar, I block it out, I turn off, like I put on Do Not Disturb on my computer, I don't even take my phone in there with me, and I just sit and write. And usually once I can get started, then I know I can keep going and I can use smaller blocks later, but I do try to give myself at least a 90-minute block when I'm trying to start something. I think the other thing that for me has been really helpful is to find yourself a good editor, whether they're going to be on the paper with you or not. So I have a colleague at Emory that we review each other's stuff pretty regularly and have done so for over a decade, because we write very differently and stylistically we're very different, but we also are very complementary. So, I'll be like, hey, Jeff, I need you to look at this. And it comes back with all its edits and it's phenomenal. And I think that goes back to like your network doesn't have to be small, right? You have to be creative, like think broadly about who can help you and in what way. So I think that's really important too.
So when it comes to approaching your initial attempts at K funding, is there any benefit to pursuing internal versus external first? Does achieving one affect your ability to get the other, so that you can have that continuous train of K?
I can take that. I think KL2, K12 is a smaller, right, 2-year grant. Usually a K23, a K08, whatever. That's usually a 3 to 5 year grant. And KL2, K12 programs are usually looking for a little bit earlier career than the other independent Ks. So there's kind of like this Goldilocks area where they sort of want you to be in. And they don't always say that explicitly, but frequently people will roll like a KL2, K12 into their own K. And those programs see success of their program as you getting a K or R after. And so really sort of I wouldn't say, you don't have to have a KL2, K12, you can just get your own K. But that's kind of, at least within the circles that like the way people conceptualize it, that's kind of how I've seen it work.
Yeah, I think part of it too depends on like how much you're able to, what kind of training you might need. And so, if you finish a KL2 in 2 years and still feel like you need a lot of training or additional preliminary data, then it may be worth going into a K23 or K08. But we were just talking to Nick Harrison, who's at Indiana, and he finishes, or he's finishing his KL2, and he's realized I have plenty of preliminary data. I've already done all the methodology training I want to do. It's time to just go for an R level funding.
In the spirit of data science support, I know it sounds like you guys have solved your own problem from educating yourself in that way. What type of institutional support do you get for statistician help to develop your aims and methods?
Yeah, that's a great question, and this kind of speaks to some extent like resources that you have. So our institution has sort of a lot of research infrastructure, and so we have some master's level statisticians, PhD level statisticians, and you can present in a research meeting to get feedback and that sort of thing. But certainly not every place has that, and even again, my own experience was that yes, these people are here and they're available, but when they're spread out across an entire department, and also when they're working on their own projects, they're there to help, but for me it was a start, but to some extent was not sufficient, or I couldn't get enough of their time. It's like, hey, let's do this, I want more of your time, I want to talk through more of this, and they didn't always have it. And so, but I don't know, I'm not sure what kind of support you guys have at your jobs.
Yeah, I think that really varies by institution, right? And I think most places will have something where you can get like a limited number of hours for free, like something like that. At least that's what I've seen. My approach to it would be, and what's worked in the past is find somebody that you can work with and sort of invest in getting them interested in your stuff and put them on papers, be generous. And as you develop that relationship, they'll continue to do more and more for you. You know, you can, so in the past where I really didn't have funding to support them, we had some statisticians at our university that we could sort of have some access to. And as the relationship grew and we did a lot of papers together, they sort of just continued and did more and more with me, and we were really familiar. So it was really easy to do that, you know. You don't have to go through the red tape of like, you know, put something in the portal or whatever. I could just email them and, you know. So I think building relationships is really important, even if there's not great funding for it.
Yeah, and I think that's important too. Just to one last thing was it's like anything else. Like when there is a relationship and you're asking someone for their time and expertise, the more you give back to them in the sense of like trying to learn a little bit, you know, responding through emails, being timely, you know, being understanding. Because again, when you have somebody who gives you, you know, positive feedback or shows interest, they're going to say like, okay, I'll give you a little bit more of my time. And I definitely monopolized one of the stats people's time because, you know, some of it was I gave him gifts when he helped on projects. I'm not saying it's bribery, but it's like I appreciate your time. I appreciate the effort. I appreciate like you explaining something complex to me who doesn't really understand it well. And then, you know, you develop that relationship. And so it's like the same way, like people who are want some of my time, if I know that they're going to follow through, we've kind of developed a relationship, then sure, I'll like put off something of my own to kind of help them versus, you know, someone's like, oh, this is an emergency. Can you do it right now? And then I scramble really hard and then I never hear from them. And it's like next time they come to me, it's like, yeah, sorry, I don't have time.
In that same vein, aside from just signing up to do a whole master's in statistics, is there any other like some intro step in between there of seeing if that's something you would be interested in, or a lot of the research stuff seems more focused on grant writing and that sort of thing. Is there any of those like intro programs for stats?
I didn't get a master's in anything. I took some courses that I thought would be relevant. They actually got rid of my master's degree while I was trying to get it. They were like, oh, we're not going to have this anymore. So I was like, well, okay. But let me rethink my strategy here. But I did take a couple really good courses, and that was helpful. So I would just encourage you, like, we all have enough degrees, right? Like, if you really want to know the nitty-gritty, you can. But it really needs to just make sense for what training you need, right? So do you need a master's, or do you just need the skills to do certain things? So if it's just skills, then find out what the best class or 2 or 3 is to get you those skills, to get you to the next step.
Yeah, and I would encourage you to look broadly across your institution. Like many university-based programs will offer some tuition assistance or reimbursement or a certain number of credit hours. So I mean, maybe it is that you start with like statistics 101 in the School of Public Health, or you know, depending on the level of skill you're looking for, but look at the other schools, like look at the School of Public Health. Depending on the type of work you do, there might actually be something in the School of Business that seems more applicable. So, you know, I do think if it's really a passion, right? It's how much of it do you want to know? But I think going back to the other question about time and support from like statisticians, as somebody who does work that is predominantly unfunded, it can be really, really hard to get time from people, right, when I can't compensate them for it. So I think that's where the collaboration and like building the relationships and being generous when you can goes a really long way. And I'm actually working on a project right now that I'm in Atlanta, somebody in Maine is going to help me with because I can't get the support that I need, but it's somebody who's been a great collaborator in the past. So kind of leveraging that relationship, and I just wrote them a letter to help them get funding for something else, saying that, you know, my site could potentially be a future site for their work and with a different patient demographic. So it is really, like, at the end of the day, so much of this is about the relationship and the collaboration, right? Whether it's with a colleague, a peer, or a mentor, and keeping those doors open to the best of your ability. And it's not bribery, it's kindness, right? It's thanks for your time, right? Because we're all really, really busy. And like when somebody is generous with their time, like if you can, you should thank them, you know, in whatever means seems appropriate.
It has been tough that industry and the Googles and everyone that needs data science has been stealing a lot of biostatisticians from different academic institutions. I know we've lost probably half of our statistical core in the last few years to industry.
So there are a couple of the online courses. I mean, it is a great idea. You oftentimes can audit a course in like whatever your local institution. There's some online stuff. Coursera has a bunch of stats modules that you can do from beginning to actually pretty advanced stuff. Some of them are free, some of them you have to pay for, some of them if you actually kind of go through the, like the trajectory of the whole course, you can get some kind of certificate. I don't know exactly what recognition you get from that. So that's out there, and you definitely have to be very self-motivated to go through that. And one of the, the limitation is that if you don't understand something, and I have looked at some of these, but if you don't understand it, then you have to find someone that you can talk to about. So there are some other options out there, and again, if you're motivated enough and disciplined enough to kind of go through that, that's a path that you can look at.
My question kind of digs deeper into this idea of time. For many of you, it's great to share that you've started work on this, like when you're a resident applying for grants or early faculty. Do you have any advice on looking back in your past and how you navigated this for those people who may be in their mid-career or transitioning or earlier, especially when you don't have enough buy-down and now you have to learn many other skills after just gone through residency, because it's in a way a new residency that you're doing to learn about research and statistics and all of that stuff. Like, how did you navigate not just balancing time to take care of yourself and take care of your family, but also just time because you have however many clinical shifts you have to do, all the other expectations from the department for you to be academically productive?
I guess I can start, or go ahead. Yeah, I'll start. I'll admit it's not easy. I wish it were easy. And I've gone through, I've failed in every way early on, but I think a few tips though that I experienced from my experiences. One, when I was able to create a story to my chair and some leadership in the department that I really did want to go down a physician scientist track, they were willing to, one, give some protected time, to really dig into that. I think it was around 20% protected time for a few years while I prepared career development award, and then it was able to parse into that. But the other thing too is, and this is where I could have done a lot better, is really working with my chair and other leadership people to kind of clear out other responsibilities that go with being part of an academic residency program. So maybe have less mentorship responsibilities, less conference attendance or didactic presentation responsibilities. That's where I could have done a lot better, I think. I mean, I was very fortunate that my chair was able to give some protected time, just out of, his kindness at the time and his devotion to, building a research department or, research mission within the department. So I have a few tips. How about you guys?
I think that's a great answer. I think it comes back to the environment that you're in somewhat, and like you kind of mentioned, making sure they're invested in what you're trying to do somewhat and trying to get some support. If they can understand where you're headed with the work that you want to do and why you need the time, and they say, yeah, okay, that's something that would be of benefit to our department, you can hopefully get some investment to get a little time to do it. But yeah, it probably won't be as much as like funded time, but you can get something to help you start.
And since a lot of things in my life come back to like a Simpsons reference, I think of this episode where Mr. Burns is talking to about children about how to be successful, and he says, family, hobbies, religion, these are the three demons you have to slay if you want to be successful in business. And that's right, tongue in cheek, but right, like some amount of sweat equity that you have to, because I agree with what both Joe and Fahim said, is that, you have to get some support, but at least for me is that like it starts with, you're gonna put a little time, you're gonna put in some sacrifice, and so that you can have something to go to your chair or your administrators and say like, hey, look, I'm interested in this, I've put this time in, like on top of all these other things, can you maybe say, yeah, like, I don't have to be an advisee to as many residents, or I don't have to do such and such. And as you put in a little bit more time and you show that you're kind of dedicated and you want to do these things, then you advocate for yourself, say, hey, look, so I started out as ultrasound faculty. There's a lot of teaching stuff that goes along with that, and over the course of my career, I've been able to extricate myself from most of the like teaching-related things that occur on a weekly basis. Not everything as much, I would like to be out of everything, but I can't. But I've cut that way down. And so, when the first few times I talked to my chair, he's like, no, show me more productivity so that I can like justify going to the other faculty and saying like, Ermin's not going to do this anymore. You guys have to pick up the slack. So, it is sweat equity, but it's also like advocating for yourself when you are having, initially it doesn't seem like a whole lot. And in my department, right, like there's a bunch of NIH funded, like very successful people. I'm like, oh, here I'm some little tiny guy, I did this one little paper, like, can you please let me off the hook for something? It's hard, but you need to do it.
One last question here.
Hi, I heard a little bit of a theme about mentorship teams, and when working on these early career development grants, what are some tips on, addressing areas where maybe your mentorship isn't as strong and going across departments or across institutions to kind of fill those gaps in mentorship teams?
Yeah, it's tough. So I think, if you can get connected with somebody at your shop that has some, I kind of go back to like the K programs, like the internal ones like KL2, K12. A lot of times they can give you some guidance there. If you have one or two mentors already, it's good to sort of bring them into that conversation of who else should be added to the team. Like, where do they see gaps, right? So generally you're going to have like a primary and maybe a co-primary or something, and then 2 or 3 others, right? Like a mentor mosaic, so to speak. I would try to take your 1 or 2 mentors and have them look at your whole portfolio and see what they think is lacking and kind of have that discussion. Because I think it does have to be really well-rounded and really well thought through in terms of what resources you get from them, what expertise they have, et cetera. So that's kind of how I would approach it.
And just one quick advice, because I made this mistake when I first applied for a career development award, is making sure at least one of those mentors has some track record of independent NIH or federal funding. If you're applying for like a career development award, particularly for federally funded ones. So. Good, well I think we are actually up on time. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and I'm sure we'll be around for questions afterwards too.